They say the hardest goodbyes are not the ones spoken aloud, but the ones that echo in silence. The silence that follows when someone who truly loved you finally stops trying to reach the walls you built to feel safe. The shadow of emotional detachment is one of the most complex inner battles avoidants face, often without ever realizing it. To understand how they miss the person who truly loves them, one must first understand what drives them to detach in the first place. For an avoidant, emotional closeness feels unsafe because it threatens the fragile structure they built to survive a world that once felt unpredictable or rejecting. At some point in their past, whether through inconsistent affection, emotional neglect, or early experiences of rejection, they learned that to depend on someone is to risk pain. Over time, they internalized a belief that love and security are temporary, and that to stay safe, they must become self-sufficient, unbothered, and emotionally contained. When someone truly loves an avoidant, that love becomes both a comfort and a threat. It awakens the hidden longing they have buried deep within, the part of them that yearns for connection but has been told it is dangerous to want it. This buried longing exists in what can be called the shadow self, the unseen dimension of their psyche where all the disowned emotions and unmet needs reside. The shadow is not evil or weak. It is simply everything the avoidant has rejected in order to survive. Love, in its purest form, has the power to illuminate that shadow. But illumination can be terrifying for someone who has spent years living in emotional control. So when an avoidant meets someone who sees through their walls, who holds them with patience instead of demand, who understands their silence rather than condemns it, they feel both drawn to and afraid of that person. Instead of surrendering to love, they retreat. They may minimize their feelings, rationalize their distance, or convince themselves that the other person loves too deeply, too intensely, too soon. What they don't realize is that these defenses are not protecting them from rejection. They are preventing them from receiving the very love that could heal their old wounds. They hide behind emotional logic, claiming they just need space, when in truth they are terrified that intimacy will expose the fragile vulnerability they've tried so hard to deny. They may appear cold or indifferent, but inside they are struggling with an internal war, the instinct to love and the fear of being loved. When the person who truly loves them finally walks away, something profound happens inside the avoidant. The silence they once sought becomes a mirror, reflecting all the emotions they tried to suppress. In that mirror, they begin to see the shadow they've been running from, the longing for touch, the need for understanding, the craving for genuine connection. What they once called weakness now feels like a missing part of themselves. The love they pushed away becomes a haunting presence, a reminder of the tenderness they once held but were too afraid to accept. They replay moments in their mind, not because they miss control or comfort, but because they miss the rare feeling of being seen without judgment. This awakening doesn't come through dramatic tears or sudden confessions. It arrives slowly, quietly, in the spaces where they once felt safe in solitude. They notice it in the emptiness of their routines, in the absence of someone who used to understand their silence. It is then they begin to realize that detachment was never strength, it was survival. And survival is not the same as living. Missing the person who truly loved them becomes an invitation to confront the shadow, to acknowledge that beneath the armor of detachment lies a heart that has always wanted to be loved, but never knew how to receive it. The avoidant's inner conflict between fearing intimacy and fearing loss is one of the most paradoxical emotional experiences a person can endure. It is a battle that unfolds quietly beneath their calm exterior, where two opposing forces constantly pull at the core of their being. On one side lies their deep desire for connection, the human need to be seen, understood, and held by someone who accepts them without judgment. On the other side lies their equally strong need for emotional safety, which for them is found in distance and control. Intimacy feels like surrender, and surrender feels like danger. Yet when love is gone, the absence of that intimacy awakens a grief far more painful than the closeness they once feared. To understand this paradox, one must recognize that the avoidance fear of intimacy is not rooted in a lack of feeling, but in the intensity of it. They feel deeply, often more deeply than they allow themselves to admit. Their childhood or early emotional experiences may have taught them that closeness leads to pain, inconsistency, or rejection. So they learn to numb, to detach, to intellectualize feelings rather than express them. For them, emotional self-reliance became a shield, a way to avoid the vulnerability that once hurt them. But when someone truly loves them, that shield starts to crack. Genuine love sees through their silence, their avoidance, and their need for control. It disarms them, making them feel both safe and exposed. The fear of intimacy arises because this exposure forces them to confront the parts of themselves they've spent years hiding, their insecurities, their unmet needs, and their longing to be loved without conditions. When someone gets too close, it triggers an old panic, the fear of losing themselves in another person or being hurt if that person leaves. So, even though they crave closeness, they retreat into solitude, convincing themselves that distance is peace. But distance, for them, is only temporarily comfortable. It's a quiet illusion of control that hides the truth of their loneliness. As time passes and the person who loves them grows tired of reaching out to walls, the avoidant often assumes they can handle the loss easily. They may even tell themselves they are better off alone. But the human heart is not built to exist in isolation. After the initial calm fades, the absence of genuine love begins to echo through their carefully constructed independence. What once felt like safety now feels like emptiness. The fear of intimacy that once protected them begins to feel insignificant compared to the pain of losing the one person who made them feel seen. It is at this point that the second fear awakens, the fear of loss. This fear is deeper and far more unsettling because it confronts the avoidant with a truth they cannot intellectualize. Love, once lost, cannot be replaced by control. The person who truly loved them becomes a ghost that lingers in their thoughts, not out of possession, but because that connection touched something sacred within them, the part of their soul that still believes in love despite the fear. They begin to remember the warmth of presence, the gentleness of understanding, the moments where their walls almost came down. These memories pierce through the emotional numbness they once relied on, reminding them that love was never the enemy. The greatest tragedy of the avoidance paradox is that they often realize this too late. They pushed away the very thing their heart needed, mistaking vulnerability for weakness and distance for strength. When love is gone, their fear of loss becomes the mirror that reveals what intimacy truly meant. It was not confinement but connection, not danger but safety. In missing the one who loved them, the avoidant comes face to face with the truth that their fear of intimacy was never about the other person. It was a reflection of their own unhealed wounds. And by the time they see this, the silence that follows becomes the loudest teacher of all. Love acts as a mirror, reflecting back to us the parts of ourselves we often cannot see, and for avoidance, this reflection is both beautiful and unbearable. The person who truly loves an avoidant often mirrors the tenderness, vulnerability, and emotional truth that the avoidant has long buried beneath layers of self-protection. They see the humanity behind the detachment, the softness hidden under the armor, the ache beneath the silence. But for the avoidant, being seen in this way can feel terrifying because it exposes the parts of their soul they've worked so hard to hide. The love they receive becomes a reflection not just of what they want, but of what they fear within themselves. The need to be loved, the desire to be understood, and the pain of having denied it for so long. When someone genuinely loves them, they are not just loving the avoidance surface, the composed, distant version that the world sees, but the raw self beneath it. This kind of love penetrates the mask, gently reaching toward the hidden child who once learned that love comes with conditions or pain. Instead of running away from that wounded part, the loving person embraces it, offering acceptance without demand. For the avoidant, this is both healing and deeply uncomfortable. It's like standing before a mirror that reflects not only their strength, but also their fears, insecurities, and emotional needs. Such reflection can feel intrusive because it challenges their self-concept of being independent and untouched by emotion. In the beginning, they may feel drawn to this person because the connection feels pure and rare. It touches something ancient within them, the longing to be known without needing to explain themselves. But as the bond deepens, the mirror begins to reveal what they have tried to forget. The love they receive illuminates their emotional wounds, reminding them of times when vulnerability led to hurt or rejection. Instead of allowing this love to heal them, their instinct is often to retreat, to shatter the mirror before it reflects too much. They may create emotional distance, withdraw, or find flaws in the person who loves them as a way to justify their withdrawal. What they are really rejecting is not the person. It is the reflection of their own unhealed self. However, love leaves an imprint, and when that person is gone, the mirror remains. In the stillness of solitude, the avoidant begins to notice what that reflection truly meant. They start to miss not just the warmth of the other person's presence, but the version of themselves that only existed when they were loved. The laughter they shared, the softness they allowed, the brief moments when they felt safe enough to be open, all become fragments of a self they rarely experience alone. It is through this absence that they realize how much that love had mirrored their own capacity to feel deeply. The avoidance regret is rarely loud. It doesn't come in the form of grand apologies or visible breakdowns. It comes in quiet realizations, in the subtle ache that surfaces when they remember how it felt to be understood without needing to speak. The mirror that once terrified them becomes a source of longing, not because they need validation, but because they miss the authenticity that love brought to their existence. In losing that person, they lose the reflection of their own emotional truth. They are left with the task of facing the mirror alone, to see what they once saw through another's eyes, to rediscover their capacity for love, not as a threat, but as the most honest expression of who they truly are. For the avoidant, grief does not arrive like a storm. It creeps in slowly, quietly, through the cracks of their solitude. When they lose the person who truly loved them, they rarely feel the weight of that loss immediately. Their emotional detachment, which once served as armor, keeps them numb at first. They convince themselves that they are fine, that they don't need anyone, that independence is peace. They go back to their routines, immerse themselves in distractions, and maintain the illusion of control. But beneath that calm surface, a silent ache begins to form, one they can neither name nor escape. This is the beginning of the delayed grief, the emotional reckoning that comes only after the noise of denial fades. Avoidants have spent much of their lives learning to suppress emotion. They learned that vulnerability leads to pain, that needing others makes them weak, and that self-sufficiency is safety. So when love leaves, they instinctively retreat into the very coping mechanisms that have always protected them: logic, distance, silence. In the early days, they may even feel relieved. The emotional pressure is gone. They no longer have to confront their fears of intimacy or explain their distance. But what they don't realize is that love, once truly experienced, doesn't vanish when the person does. It lingers like an imprint on the soul, a memory that waits for stillness to resurface. Weeks or months later, when the noise of their defenses quiets, the emptiness begins to echo. The routines that once provided comfort start to feel hollow. The solitude that once felt safe begins to feel heavy. They find themselves thinking about the person they lost, not in grand romantic gestures, but in subtle moments. A scent, a song, a quiet evening can suddenly bring back the memory of being seen and understood. These small reminders pierce through the emotional numbness they built, awakening a grief that had been postponed. It's not the kind of grief that screams, it whispers. It shows up in the middle of the night when everything else is still, reminding them of what they pushed away. This delayed grief is confusing for the avoidant because it doesn't align with their sense of control. They are used to compartmentalizing emotions, but love's absence doesn't stay neatly contained. It spills into unexpected places: fatigue, irritability, moments of nostalgia they can't shake. For the first time, they begin to realize that detachment hasn't spared them from pain. It has only delayed it. And when it arrives, it is deeper because it carries not only loss but regret. They begin to understand that what they lost wasn't just a relationship. It was the one person who made them feel safe enough to be human. Unlike others who might process grief through tears or conversations, the avoidant processes it internally. They replay moments in silence, questioning how they let something so genuine slip away. They may never admit it aloud, but inside, they know that the person who loved them didn't just offer affection, they offered healing. That love held space for the parts of them they refused to face, and losing it feels like losing a part of themselves. The walls that once protected them now become the prison that isolates them. The tragedy of this delayed grief is that it arrives too late to save what was lost. The avoidant begins to see that independence without connection is emptiness disguised as strength. What they once called peace was only avoidance. Now, every quiet moment becomes a reminder of the warmth they once rejected. The silence that once comforted them becomes unbearable because it carries the echo of the love they could not hold. And though they may never say it, their heart knows the truth. They did feel, they did care, and they do miss the person who truly loved them. The grief that took so long to appear becomes the proof that they were never as unfeeling as they tried to believe. When the avoidant finally begins to miss the person who truly loved them, it is not a sudden realization born out of loneliness. It is an awakening that unfolds in silence. For so long they have lived behind walls built from fear and self-preservation, mistaking emotional distance for safety. Love, for them, was a territory they did not know how to inhabit. They associated closeness with the loss of control and vulnerability with danger. So when someone truly loved them, with patience, depth, and understanding, it unsettled them. They could feel something real stirring within, but the intensity of that truth was too much to face. They withdrew, rationalized, and convinced themselves that they were better off without emotional entanglement. They told themselves that love fades, that people always leave, that they are stronger alone. But the truth they could not yet see was that the one who loved them wasn't trying to confine them, they were trying to meet them where their fear began. When love finally disappears from their life, it doesn't happen with noise or drama. It happens quietly, like a door closing in another room. The avoidant may not even notice at first. They tell themselves it's for the best, that everything is as it should be. But in the quiet moments when the distractions fade, a subtle awareness starts to surface. Something feels missing, not comfort, not convenience, but presence. It's the way that person's energy filled a room, the way their words softened tension, the way their understanding made silence feel safe. Slowly, the avoidant starts to feel the edges of absence pressing inward. The peace they once craved begins to feel like isolation. What they called independence begins to resemble emptiness. This stage marks a shift deep within them, a realization that love was never a threat to their freedom, but a mirror of their own capacity to connect. They begin to understand that the one who loved them never asked them to surrender their independence. They only wanted to share the space within it. The avoidant starts to replay moments in their mind, not out of regret for what was said or done, but because of what was felt. They remember the way that person looked at them, the small gestures of affection that didn't demand anything in return. These memories, once easy to dismiss, now echo with meaning. They reveal that genuine love had always been a safe place, not a cage. Missing the person who truly loved them becomes a profound internal reckoning. It's not just missing another human. It's missing the version of themselves that emerged in that love. That version who smiled without caution, who let their guard down, who felt alive in connection. The avoidant begins to realize that the love they pushed away was never trying to consume them. It was trying to show them who they could become if they allowed themselves to be vulnerable. The silence that follows the loss becomes a teacher. It shows them how love was not about losing control, but about finding a shared rhythm that made life softer, more meaningful. In this silent realization, the avoidant often finds themselves caught between understanding and remorse. They see clearly that they were not protecting themselves from pain. They were protecting themselves from healing. They feared love because it demanded they face their buried wounds. Yet in doing so, they denied themselves the one experience that could have made them whole. Now, as they sit with the emptiness left behind, they finally see that love was never the enemy. It was the answer. The walls that once made them feel safe now stand as monuments to what they've lost. And in that stillness, they begin to understand that missing someone is not weakness. It is evidence of love finally being felt in its purest, most honest form. The avoidance journey is not about loss alone, it is about awakening. Love, in its purest form, is the mirror that reflects every hidden truth we try to escape. For the avoidant, missing the person who truly loved them is not just longing for someone else. It is the quiet recognition of what they once had the chance to feel, but were too afraid to hold. The distance that once promised peace now reveals its emptiness, and the silence they once cherished begins to ache with memory. Through that ache, something begins to shift. The realization that love was never a threat to their freedom, but a bridge to their healing. And though they may not always find their way back to the one they lost, the memory of that love remains, whispering that the heart's greatest strength is not in guarding itself, but in daring to open again.